I booked the Airbnb because it looked perfect. Spacious, quiet, and just far enough from the city to feel like a retreat. The listing mentioned a locked basement, but that didn't bother me. Plenty of places have storage areas off limits to guests. The first red flag was the clothing. It started by the jacuzzi tub, a crumbled pair of jeans and a t-shirt, like someone had stripped down in a hurry and never came back. I figured maybe the cleaners missed it, though it felt off. Later, in one of the bedrooms, I found a single sock and a hoodie draped over the chair. Again, I shrugged it off. People forget things. But then I saw something that made my stomach twist. A pair of women's leggings was half tucked under the bed. They looked worn, like someone had been wearing them recently. The unsettling part: I was the first guest in over a month, according to the Airbnb listing. I messaged the host. "Hey, I found some clothing left behind. Thought you might want to let the cleaners know." The response came too fast. "Oh, don't worry about that. Just leave them where they are. Enjoy your stay." That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that makes you hear things that aren't there. I tossed and turned until, around 2 a.m., I heard it. A soft, rhythmic thumping. I sat up, heart pounding. It was coming from the basement door. Not a knock, not creaking wood. A slow, deliberate thump, like someone pressing against it from the other side. I froze, straining to listen. After a few seconds, it stopped. Maybe the pipes, maybe the house settling. I told myself anything to avoid the worst thought creeping into my mind. Someone is down there. I barely slept. The next morning, I checked the basement door. Still locked. But now, something was different. The hoodie I found in the bedroom, it was gone. I hadn't moved it. I searched the house, but it was nowhere. My skin went cold. I packed my things immediately. I didn't care about the second night I had booked. I just wanted out. As I was leaving, I checked my Airbnb app to leave a review. That's when I noticed something strange. The previous reviews were all positive, but every few months, one would disappear. Just gone. Like the guests who wrote them had never stayed there at all. I never reported it. I never asked the host about the missing clothes, the sounds from the basement, or the vanishing reviews. I don't want to know the answer. I just know I'll never book an Airbnb with a locked basement again. A preserved 19th century Victorian home, untouched by time, limited electricity, but just enough for a laptop, no Wi-Fi, only a landline, isolated, deep in the countryside, no neighbors, no traffic, just the house, the forest, and absolute silence. I booked the Victorian house because I needed quiet. A week of isolation, just me, my laptop, and time to work. It was exactly as described, untouched by modern renovations, with limited electricity but enough to power my laptop and a few dim lights. The landline phone was old but functional. The place felt frozen in time. The first night, I barely noticed the fog rolling in. It crept up from the forest, thick and heavy, swallowing the ground until I couldn't even see the driveway. I worked late, then went to bed. Sometime in the night, I woke up. A noise, a faint creak, like someone stepping on an old wooden floor. I held my breath, listening. Nothing. It was an old house, probably just settling. I went back to sleep. In the morning, it felt ridiculous to be scared. The house was peaceful in daylight, and I convinced myself I'd let my imagination get the best of me. To shake off the unease, I drove to the nearest town, a quiet little place with antique shops, a diner, and a general store. The locals were friendly but seemed surprised to hear I was staying at that house. Didn't think anyone rented it anymore, the cashier at the general store said. Why not? I asked. She just shrugged. Too far out for most folks, I guess. By evening, I was back at the house. The fog returned, rolling in like a tide. I worked for a while, stretched, and went to the window. The fog was so thick I could barely see the front yard. But then, something moved. A shadow, deep in the fog, tall, motionless. Then another, and another. Figures standing just beyond the porch. I blinked, and they were gone. I closed the curtains and forced myself to ignore it. I woke up to knocking, not at the front door, at my bedroom window, on the second floor. The sound was soft but deliberate. I stared at the window, heart pounding. The fog outside was thick, pressing against the glass like something alive. I didn't look. I couldn't. I stayed frozen until the knocking stopped. Morning came, and again, everything felt normal. I told myself it could have been a tree branch, even though I knew there were no trees that close to the house. I tried to work, but my nerves were shot. The house felt different now. The silence was too deep, like the walls were holding their breath. By evening, the fog was worse than ever. I kept the curtains shut, but I knew they were out there. The silhouettes, watching. The sound started around midnight, thumps from the first floor, a scraping noise from the attic, a deep dragging sound from the basement, where the owners stored old furniture and God knows what else. I sat in bed, covers pulled to my chin, listening. The air was freezing, my breath visible in the dim light. Then, footsteps coming up the stairs, slow, steady. I grabbed my keys and my bag and didn't look back. I left that night. I never found the listing again. It was gone. No trace of the house online. I don't know what I saw in the fog, but I know this. I wasn't alone in that house, and neither is anyone else who stays there. I booked the Airbnb for a quiet vacation alone. The house was small, old, but cozy, just what I needed. The host's message was short. Enjoy your stay. Basement is for storage. Please don't move anything. The basement wasn't mentioned in the listing, but I didn't think much of it. That first night, after unpacking and settling in, I heard a thump from below. It startled me, but I told myself it was just the house settling. Still, I had to check. I opened the basement door. The weak light flickered on, revealing a cluttered space. Dusty furniture, old boxes, and in the far corner, 4 mannequins covered in white sheets. Their featureless forms were unsettling, but they weren't moving, obviously. Just forgotten relics. I shut the door and went to bed. By morning, the fear seemed silly. I went into town, had coffee at a little cafe, browsed an antique shop. The Airbnb was just an old house, nothing creepy about it in the daylight. That night, though, I heard another sound from the basement. I hesitated before opening the door. The mannequins were different. One of them had moved. It was closer to the stairs now, still covered, but turned slightly, like it had shifted toward me. I swallowed hard. Maybe I just didn't remember how they were before. Maybe the host had come by. But that didn't make sense. Who would rearrange mannequins in the middle of the night? I shut the door fast and locked it. I forced myself to ignore it. I went for a long walk, stopped at a local bookstore, even watched a movie on my laptop. It was all in my head. It had to be. That night, though, I heard dragging, slow, heavy, from the basement. I sat in bed, clutching the blankets. My pulse hammered in my ears. I wanted to check, but I also didn't. Eventually, I convinced myself that I was being paranoid and fell into a restless sleep. I avoided the basement all day. That night, the sounds started again, this time closer. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to look. I opened the basement door. One of the mannequins was standing at the bottom of the stairs. The sheet had slipped, revealing part of its smooth, blank face. It wasn't possible. No one had been in the house but me. I slammed the door shut, shoved a chair in front of it, and stayed awake until morning. I had decided I was leaving. I packed my bags and called the host, but no one answered. I didn't care. I was done. But at 3:12 a.m., something woke me. A soft creak. The basement door was open. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. I held my breath, heart pounding. Then from the darkness of the hall, a whisper. "Why are you leaving?" I didn't look. I grabbed my bag and ran. I reported the Airbnb to the company. They said the house had been empty for years. The host's account had been inactive for months. The police found the house abandoned. Dust-covered furniture, a few boxes, no mannequins, no sign anyone had lived there in a long, long time. But I know what I saw, and I still hear that whisper in my dreams. Why are you leaving? I don't usually stay in places like this, big old houses with too much space and too much history. But the photos had looked charming, and the price was right. A week of solitude in a Victorian Airbnb nestled in the middle of nowhere sounded like the break I needed. The first 2 nights were uneventful. The house creaked and groaned as old houses do, but I slept fine. There was a locked door leading to the basement, which the host had mentioned in their welcome message. "Please don't try to open it," they'd said. "It's just storage." I had no intention of going down there anyway. On the 3rd morning, I woke up feeling off. Not sick, just unsettled. As I swung my legs over the bed, my breath caught. The hallway carpet outside my bedroom door was wet. No, not just wet. Muddy. I forced myself to stand, to step closer. There were footprints, bare footprints, trailing up the stairs and stopping directly outside my door. My stomach turned. The front door had been locked. The windows too. I double-checked every night. I pressed my hand against the bedroom door. It was still locked from the inside. Someone, or something, had come up from the basement. For a long time, I didn't move. The house was silent, but I felt watched, exposed. I tried to tell myself the prints had been there before, that I just hadn't noticed. But that was impossible. Eventually, I had to move. I cracked open the door, peering out. The footprints led down the stairs, disappearing where the wooden floor began. The basement door at the bottom was shut, locked. Just like always, I spent the rest of the day pretending nothing had happened. I left the house, went into town, sat in a cafe for hours. I thought about calling the host, but what would I even say? By the time I returned, the footprints had dried into faint, brown smudges. That night, I pushed a chair against my bedroom door before going to sleep. Nothing happened. Nothing happened the night after that either. On my last morning, just before leaving, I stood at the top of the stairs, staring down at the basement door. The air felt different, lighter somehow. Whatever had come up wasn't here anymore. I don't know what it wanted or why it stopped outside my door. But as I stepped outside, suitcase in hand, I felt a strange sense of relief. Like I wasn't just leaving the house behind. I was leaving it behind too. I don't scare easily. I've stayed in plenty of Airbnbs, some old, some isolated, some with their own quirks. So when I booked a cabin deep in the woods for a weekend retreat, I wasn't expecting anything unusual. The place was cozy, with rustic wooden beams and a fireplace that crackled softly at night. The host left a note on the counter. "Welcome! Feel free to use the kitchen and fireplace. The basement is for storage. Please don't go down there." That was fine by me. I had no reason to go into the basement. At least, not until the first night. I was getting ready for bed when I noticed something odd. A faint glow coming from under the basement door. The light was on. I didn't remember turning it on, but maybe the previous guest had left it that way. I opened the door just a crack. The light bulb at the bottom of the stairs flickered weakly. I hesitated, then flipped the switch off. The glow vanished. I shut the door, locked it, and went to bed. The next evening I was reading in the living room when I noticed it again. A pale, flickering light seeping out from beneath the basement door. I frowned. I knew I had turned it off. I grabbed my phone, walked over, and flipped the switch again. Off. I stood there for a moment, waiting. Nothing happened. Just old wiring, I told myself. But as I turned away, I heard it. A soft creak from the bottom of the stairs. I froze. It could have been the house settling. It could have been my imagination. Or it could have been footsteps. I locked the door again and went to bed with my heart pounding in my chest. I barely slept the night before, convincing myself it was nothing. But when the sun set, I found myself glancing at the basement door more and more. And then, right on cue, the light flickered on. This time, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my flashlight and my phone and yanked the door open. The light bulb above the stairs buzzed, dim and flickering. I flipped the switch. The bulb went out. For a second, everything was quiet. Then, in the pitch-black basement, I heard it. A single footstep, then another. Slow, steady, coming up the stairs. I backed away, my breath caught in my throat. My flashlight flickered, struggling to stay on. I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at me to shut the door and leave. But something told me, whatever this was, it wasn't going away, so I did something I never thought I'd do. I spoke. "Who's there?" The footsteps stopped. Silence. My flashlight steadied, casting a dim beam down the stairs, and for the first time I saw it. Not a figure, not a shadow, just the last 3 steps of the staircase, warped and sagging with age. The wood looked darker, almost charred, like there had once been a fire. A thought hit me. Maybe someone had been trapped down there. Maybe a long time ago, someone had tried to get out, but the fire had stopped them, and maybe they still were. Heart pounding, I swallowed hard and spoke again. "You can go now." The silence stretched. The air felt heavier. Then with a final flicker, the basement light turned off on its own. I shut the door, locked it, and for the first time in 3 nights, I slept without fear. The next morning, I packed up and left. As I drove away, I sent a message to the host. "Hey, just so you know, the basement light keeps turning on by itself. Might be faulty wiring." They responded almost immediately. "That's impossible. There hasn't been a light bulb in that basement for years." I didn't reply. I just kept driving, and I never looked back.